So Rebecca Jarvis is an Emmy Award-winning journalist. She's ABC News's chief business, technology, and economics correspondent, the host and creator of the Dropout podcast, which chronicles the rise and fall of Theranos and its leader, Elizabeth Holmes. I highly recommend it. You can download the Dropout wherever you get your podcast. I was very lucky to call Rebecca a colleague for a few years at CBS before she moved over to ABC. And I think you'll find the way she breaks all things down extremely helpful. Rebecca, I'm so glad to be talking to you.
Moshe, it's great to see you again. And it's really exciting to see what you're building here too. So congratulations.
Well, hopefully one day Elon Musk will be interested
He has a few $100 billion left over, so there's hope.
Exactly. So I want to talk Theranos, but I want to begin with the news of the week. Elon and Twitter, the richest person in the world, buying one of the most influential social media companies. If you could break down for us what it means and specifically what it is he says he's going to do with the platform.
I mean, Moshe, what's interesting here is that Elon Musk has said he wants to transform this platform. At the same time, we don't know how that's going to look when he ultimately gets in there and starts talking to employees. Some of the biggest things he's talked about: authenticating users, verifying user identities, kicking bots off the platform so that some of the spread of disinformation, some of these, the really nasty things that are being said by individuals you don't know who they are because they are bots, don't get said as much on the platform, but he wants to keep it free and transparent. And he talks a lot about free speech. There's also the edit button that so many users have talked about wanting, such that you could send a tweet and edit it after the fact. And also potentially opening up the algorithm so that everybody can see it. It's more transparent. Again, it's really going to come down to, once he gets into this company, what do the employees want? How are they going to work with him? And then I think there's another big question here, which is the advertisers. Twitter last year did about $5 billion in sales, and most of that is advertising revenue. I interviewed the GM CEO, Mary Barra, recently, and I said to her, so let's just say, and this was before the deal closed, let's just say that one of your biggest competitors, Elon Musk, who owns Tesla, or excuse me, is the CEO of Tesla, now owns Twitter, which is one of your major advertising platforms. Are you going to be willing to spend the same kind of money on Twitter advertising for General Motors and all of the cars as you would if it wasn't owned by Elon Musk? She, wasn't able to say at that time what they would do, but she also wasn't unequivocal that, yes, we'll just continue with the way things are. She wanted to know how things are going to go and see, are the same terms in place? But that is a good question for Twitter going forward. If advertisers, which are the bulk of their revenue, are not as comfortable under this new scenario, is there an alternate way that Elon Musk would make money on the platform? He doesn't necessarily need to make money on the platform if he's willing to burn his own money.
Well, I find it so interesting because he literally said this deal isn't about making money. I think the quote was, "I don't care about the economics at all." He wants to build a platform that is important to the future of civilization. What do you make of that take, and what would investors say about not caring about the money?
Well, I mean, if you're an investor, you obviously are looking for a return. And that is why this deal got done, because there weren't any other buyers. $54.20 a share was the best offer that the Twitter board was going to get. There weren't any other offers. And it was their fiduciary responsibility to take the deal because there wasn't, it really speaks in addition to the fact that there weren't any other suitors, it speaks to the fact about a long-term vision for this company and what could happen. I think it's really interesting that Jack Dorsey has spoken out, CEO, founder of Twitter, former CEO, all-time founder of Twitter, has spoken out about being really supportive. He tweeted the Radiohead song, Everything in Its Place. Is that the name of the song, Moshe? I'm a Radiohead fan, but Creep, I had Creep play at my bat mitzvah. It was the first song we played at my bat mitzvah. I don't remember all the Radiohead songs, but big fan.
I think I had Ace of Base and Boys to Men at my bar mitzvah. I think we were similar time periods there in the Midwest in the mid-90s, Rebecca. Mm-hmm. So I was struck by this. The Financial Times says, Twitter's 16 years old, and like many teenagers, is trying to figure out what it wants to be. It struggled with the lack of innovation. It's never been consistently profitable. It's small compared to some of its social media competitors. And of course, there's the free speech challenges that it's been facing as far as misinformation and abuse and that sort of thing. Um, Elon is the richest man in the world. This seems like a big headache. Why do you think he wants this?
I mean, it's impossible to get inside of someone else's head. Things that he has said is that this is for, you know, the protection of the world, that he sees this as part of his life's mission. I do think, having interviewed a handful of billionaires, not Elon Musk specifically, but some of these incredibly wealthy individuals, especially on the flip side of making that money, there's this feeling of wanting to leave a legacy. And I don't know if it's coming from a place of guilt or a place of responsibility, but when you find yourself in this position where everything that you could possibly want can be yours, then you start to think longer term about how you will be remembered. And even beyond that, I mean, there also is this point of like, you can have more money than anyone else, and there's still things that are out of reach. So how much of it is like a competitive thing of just wanting to try to have that? I think the comparison of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, where they're both in the space race, they're both in this race to be the wealthiest, and you know, they're both very, very high up on that list. Elon Musk happens to be number one right now. But you look at the comparison: Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post, $250 million. Elon Musk buying Twitter, $44 billion. I mean, these are magnitudes of difference in terms of the cost. And yet here we are.
One thing I was curious whether you could answer was taking a company private. What does that
Mhm.
mean for users? I mean, there's a lot of concerns that he could, he can go inside people's DMs. He can use this for his own business interests. What sort of government oversight still exists when a company is private versus is public?
Well, there are fewer restrictions on private companies than public companies, but a lot of that has to do with the financial accounting and reporting, because the SEC's oversight of a public company versus a private company. I think some of the questions are going to be more related to the FTC and communications, and how there haven't been, at this point, there really has not been a really direct line around social media and who do we trust, who has access to that information. Those are still big questions that regulators are going to have to answer. Now, some people have asked this question: could regulators stand in the way of this transaction? And everyone I've spoken to says, no, that's not going to be the case, because we're not talking about an antitrust situation here. He's the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, but those are not companies that play in the same field as Twitter. I will say, in sort of this rivalry between Bezos and Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos was tweeting about this deal, and he raised this question of what happens with China, because of course, Elon Musk with Tesla, they sell a lot of Teslas in China, and that's part of the long-term business plan. Could China lean on Elon Musk and say, whether it's a ban or it's whatever it is in terms of speech in China with Twitter, could China exert that force over Elon Musk with Tesla, because that's where he has major financial interests? Ultimately, Bezos, the tweet, and there could be more by the time people are listening to this, but where he fell on that was that Musk is an extraordinary adept negotiator. He'll figure things out with China, basically.
And I want to get to the free speech issue, because that's come up big, and that's certainly a dilemma for moderating content, whether it's Google and YouTube, whether it's Meta and Facebook and Instagram, and of course Twitter's been dealing with it. Can you lay out for us how, in your discussions and your reporting at Silicon Valley, they've been approaching this? We saw this week that Europe has instituted its latest law against tech companies, something we haven't even seen. I think it's their third in Europe, and we haven't seen one here in the US. But how these companies have been approaching the moderation of content, and the particular challenges that Elon may face when it comes to Twitter and free speech and moderation?
A lot of it is on the companies themselves here in the US to figure it out. And it's also on the consumers to figure it out. I think this idea that nothing is guaranteed. Once users grow tired of a service or feel that it isn't working to their advantage, they start opting out. And Twitter, and not to suggest that huge numbers of people are opting out of Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any of these social media giants. However, that said, a lot of them peaked in terms of their users, and the actual amount of consumption is starting to decline somewhat. And well, I'm not betting against any of these social media giants in the long term. I do ask myself about human nature and how committed we are to doing the same things over and over again habitually. And you're seeing it, for example, with Netflix, with subscribers dropping off Netflix. Now, these services are free, so it's not a giant apples to apples comparison, but everybody has a limited amount of time in their day. There's always going to be a new thing. And I do wonder if we're sort of hitting a wall in some of these things, and users, again, as consumers, you have power as a consumer. If you delete the thing, if you don't pay attention to it, that's one less person who's participating in it. And that's not what I'm specifically advocating for here. But I do think that the US has taken more of this approach as opposed to Europe, which has taken a far more regulatory approach. We've had, here in the US, we've had these big moments where the CEOs go in front of legislators on Capitol Hill, and yet almost nothing comes of that other than the theater that we watch on the news at night.
All right, one final question there, and then we'll get to Theranos. But are they taking it seriously? Do they understand? I mean, it was interesting to me, like if you talked to Facebook several years ago, they're like, well, we're not responsible for this sort of thing. And then there was a quick realization that like, no, actually, we really, what happens on our platform leads to things like planning for January 6th and election impact, et cetera. How serious are they taking their responsibility when it comes to what is said and done on their platforms?
Well, if you want to take the most cynical approach, they take it as seriously as it becomes a business risk. So if you risk losing customers, if you risk losing advertisers, if there are risks to the bottom line, then you will take it seriously. If there's no fallout for you and for your company personally, then why make changes? I also think, though, that there is, from talking to a number of leaders in the space, they also do maintain this mindset of they believe that the bigger picture, this idea of just having this open space that's been created, is more important than navigating inside of it, if that makes sense. And look, I think that what Elon Musk, at least at this point, has said he would like to do with this is to give something completely different than what has been tried, and to do it as a private company means he doesn't have to make sure that the shareholders are getting paid. He doesn't have to try to maximize profits every quarter. So there are different models. I mean, if they weren't going to go the advertising path, we talked about some of the questions there. He can try, there have been ideas floated, like, would he charge users? Now, of course, if you're trying to be egalitarian and democratic, then suddenly when you're charging users, that can end up keeping people off the platform. And that raises questions in and of itself. But it's still, again, from the beginning of this conversation, I said early days, I still think that's a really important thing, because what people are hearing today from both Elon Musk as well as everyone else who's got an opinion on this could be very, very different than what if and when this deal closes. And I believe that from every source I've talked to that it will close, but that still could be 6 or 9 months from now. And when that happens, we could be looking at a really different world and a very different picture based on what the employees and Elon Musk discuss.
To be continued. The end of the story has not been written there. So